Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into our third and final variant of our Perennial Artisan Ales Abraxas trio that we got several weeks ago. This is the coffee variant, so it's got the exact same ingredients list as the other two variants, only it does have the added coffee. So ancho chilies, cacao nibs, cinnamon, vanilla, and coffee. This is stump coffee and specifically a Oaxacan blend. It also, I did note on the side, does say on this beer, while they don't list it as their additives, it does say contains lactose over here under the please recycle label. So that does kind of go to explain why some of these flavors were popping out more and tasting more like themselves other than getting muddled in the roast. And I don't think that the lactose is really a centerpiece in this beer. It's just enough to let the added ingredients speak and have their own voice. I always think that's a clever choice. So, Perennial Artisan Ales, based in St. Louis, Missouri. This, just as the other two Abraxas versions, clocks in at 11.5% ABV. The exact same label, other than it's got coffee on the middle. And again, these are all the 2021 releases of this beer. So we're going to get this cracked and pour it right in the old stout glass here. Yep, that's right. It's a very thick, very, very thick beer. It's a thick, heavy beer. So we're going to let this glug give that head a chance to form. It's just so thick. And if my memory serves, it will slowly work its way up and get a little creamier. Yeah, visually I can see it. It's a very, very slow crawl up for these fine, tiny champagne-like bubbles to make their ways up through this very thick, viscous beer. Just as with the prior versions, a foot and a half away, I can still really get the aroma already. I mean, as soon as you started to pour in the glass. So we're going to get right up over it and see exactly what this one smells like. Noticeably, how much that coffee comes through. Oh yeah. So rich and roasty, that malt bill. You can just smell the roastiness of that malt bill, the undercurrents of it. The ancho chilies you can smell distinctly. Ancho chilies are great. I love them. I cook with them often, and it's got a very distinct aroma. Not a super spicy chili, but it does have some heat, like all chilies. You can get the cinnamon. You can get the vanilla. The coffee on this one, to me, is really binding with that roasty malt bill, and it kind of pops in and out and kind of mixes aromatically with the cinnamon as well, but it smells fantastic. If the first two versions were any kind of clue, then I know I'm in for a treat. And really, you take a beer this big with all these ingredients and you add coffee to the mix, I can't see how it's not going to be great. So we're going to dive in and find out. Here we go, sip number one. Oh, man. Oh, there it is. Oh, gosh. It's been so long, I forgot how good this beer is. Wow. This is just one of those top tier, upper echelon, you gotta drink it. You find it, grab it. Imperial Stouts. It's just so well done. It is so well done. Man, what a good beer. So, yes, it's big. Yes, it's bold. Yes, it's intense. And we will talk about these flavors. But first, let's talk texture. This glugged out of that bottle. I remembered it being thick. I didn't remember it being quite that thick. It is a thick, heavy beer. The weight is heavy. It's not medium heavy. It's properly heavy. It's 11.5%, and it is a big beer with a lot of stuff in it. So it has some real heft to it. You can feel that weight when you swallow. Terms of resistance, viscosity, general mouthfeel, very, very resistant. Very, very viscous. It is incredibly thick. This one, when you agitate on the palate, does get a lot silkier. It doesn't foam up. It gets, you could call it creamy, but it gets so fine it feels much more silky, and you can just feel the silky thickness moving around the palate, and it really matches the heft of that body. It is absolutely impressive. So body and mouthfeel, top tier, just like I remembered from the first two. So let's talk about the flavors. So yes, the coffee version. How does it differ? Well, it differs in the addition of coffee. How does that actually change the entire beer drinking experience? Not significant, other than the fact that I love coffee. I love coffee beers, especially in a big dark beer like this. And then mixing with these other ingredients, it's a great ingredient choice to choose. The standard version has everything in this ingredient list except for the coffee. The vanilla version has everything in this ingredient list except for the coffee. And the reason they call it the vanilla version is they add additional vanilla to it, because vanilla is in the base beer as well. This coffee version is the one that really deviates the most, because it's got everything the other two have, but also that coffee addition. And it absolutely works beautifully in this beer. So the first thing you get when you swallow is a big rush of roasty malt underpinnings, the backbone of the beer itself. It's very prevalent. A lot of malts went into this beer. They are deeply, deeply roasted, and you get this incredible sense of roastiness, of earthiness, of bordering on bits of char. There's no smokiness at all in this one, but it's clearly very deep, dark roast. That pairs magnificently with the cinnamon, which also pops out really clearly in this beer. The vanilla in the non-vanilla version, it's there, but it is a little bit more subtle. It's just an additional flavor that plays in, and it kind of pairs with a little bit of that lactose side that they added to really let it speak. Also a good and clever idea to do. So where does the coffee come into play? Well, it comes right behind the cinnamon, at least in the layers of how it opens up in the profile. So I got malt first, then cinnamon, then coffee. So what that does, at least from my beer drinking experience, is it puts me in mind of how I take my coffee at home. I drink very, very dark black coffee, no sweetener, so yeah, there's lactose here. That's a deviation, but I always sprinkle cinnamon in it. I love it in coffee, and it works so beautifully and pairs so well. That flavor combination is fantastic. And the other nice thing is this is a nice, deep, rich roast coffee, and it just matches perfectly the intensity of that roastiness from this malt bill. It is absolutely delicious. I'm going to jump in for a second sip, make sure I didn't miss anything. We'll talk about the finish, but man, equally impressed with this one as the prior two. Absolutely love it. What a great beer. Slight booziness, roasty, roasty malt, cinnamon, coffee. There's the vanilla. Yeah, on second sip, I noticed that there was a little bit more of a booziness to it than I got on the first sip. So it's obviously thick. It sticks around the palate, so there's going to be residual bits on each sip. So yeah, and that is something you can get a little bit on the aroma. It's not an off-putting booziness. It's the kind of booziness in a big beer that I personally like. Like, yeah, there's a little suggestion of it. Yeah, this is a bigger beer. It is a bigger beer. I have no problem with that aroma or flavor in a bigger beer because it is a bigger beer. Don't try to hide what you are. Be proud of it. They put a lot of work into making this beer what it is, and it's not off-putting to me. But just big, bold, pungent flavors. They all pop in one after the next, and then they just swirl around, and it's just this mishmash of all these flavors that keep popping in and out of one another and combining, and it's absolutely delicious. There is a real intensity of flavor here, which, frankly, for my money, goes very well with a beer that's this big-bodied and this thickly mouthfeel. Just this big burst of intense flavor profile. Absolutely fantastic, and I love it. So the finish. Just as with the first two versions of this beer, it's quite long. It really does stick. It's a thick beer. It sticks around the palate. It doesn't dry out at the end. It's nice and wet and round to the end. But just as with the first beers, there are very distinct flavors that linger on the palate long after each sip. In this specific one, it's a combination of three things. It's the underpinning of that roasty malt, it's the coffee, and it's the cinnamon. Those are the three that linger, and frankly, for my money, of all of this that's put together, that's the three that I like the most. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, yes, there is still a little residual heat tingle in the mouth as well. You don't get the flavor of the ancho chilies on the back end, but there is still residual heat that lingers. And we're not talking oppressive. If you don't like spicy food, this is not going to put you off. It's just an added sensory experience, and I love it. Man, I absolutely have enjoyed every one of these Perennial Artisan Ales. 2021 release Abraxas versions. This one, absolutely, I'll tell you now, it's my favorite. I love it. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we'll get this beer ranked from top to bottom. This was Perennial Artisan Ales Abraxas, the coffee version 2021 release, 11.5% ABV, Imperial Stout brewed with ancho chilies, cacao nibs, cinnamon, vanilla, and coffee. They also did mention on the side that it does have lactose, though it wasn't a major player. It just let the added ingredients really come through and taste as they should. Perennial Artisan Ales is based in St. Louis, Missouri. So this is the third and final release that I tried from this trio I got from Tavour. And I had the standard Abraxas, the vanilla Abraxas, which is the same, just added vanilla into the recipe. This was one with the greatest deviation because it's the only one with coffee in it. And while it did have the same spirit of all of the others that I tried, there were some definite differences. So I'm first going to go through and tell you outright, this beer only missed perfection across all categories by 1 point. It got a 9 in the balance. Everything else got a perfect 10 out of 10. Now, this in and of itself is a little bit of a deviation. This one had a much heavier body than the other two, which was surprising. I gave them above average, but they weren't properly heavy. This one felt properly heavy. And everything else that kind of kicked it up. And sure, 11.5%. Big Imperial Stout, you might expect that, but the other two weren't quite as oppressively heavy, and I don't want to say oppressively in a negative light, just very, very heavy, and it went with the style, it went with the beer, it played well to its strengths. So the balance, I give a 9, and it really what it came down for me was this. There were two things that I thought on after having two Abraxas prior to this, and then this one with the coffee. One, I would have liked even more coffee in this version. The vanilla version was very vanilla dominant and vanilla prominent. This one, the coffee was quite clear, but I would have liked even more coffee to really set it apart. I think it would have been an even more cohesive base based on the base malt bill, the depth of roast that came through to tie the other added ingredients together. And then there was one side thing that I thought after having the third and final version of this. The ancho chilies, absolutely delicious, but for my money, not even necessarily adding enough to add additional flavor because it was there and it was quite nice, worked well, but maybe just a little bit of additional heat. I think would have tied this beer a little better together, maybe gave it a little different leg up compared to its competition. There's a lot of big Imperial Stouts with relatively similar ingredient lists. I brewed some at home. And really the heat factor is one that you don't get in all of them, though it's in quite a few. But ancho is a relatively mild chili, maybe just a little additional heat, a little extra coffee, just give it that extra oomph. But again here, I'm being really nitpicky. I'm just describing my personal subjective thoughts on the matter while telling you why I docked 1 point in the balance. On this coffee variant, really it came down just, I needed a little more coffee in it. What did come through was very, very delicious. I absolutely loved it. In general, this beer, no question about it, this is one of those that if you see it, you need to buy it. This is a top tier, world-class Imperial Stout. Extremely well done. I enjoyed the first two versions. This third was my favorite, and I think they were all only 1 point apart, 97, 98, and a 99 respectively. Absolutely loved it. If you see this, if you're lucky enough to find a bottle somewhere, do yourself the favor, grab it. You're not going to regret it. This is absolutely world-class, top-tier beer. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on the notifications, hit that bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.